The first time is always the most painful. So they say. Though frankly, I've long since forgotten what it was like for me the first time. On the other hand, even if it's the 1,000th time, it's always unpleasant to be resurrected. It's funny. People used to think the most unpleasant thing was dying, but they reasoned about it back in the days when no one could check it. Strange, sparkling, impetuous times when everyone was trapped on a single planet. Not at all like the things are working now. Of course, the initiative to go on this cruise was Esmeralda's. It's not that I wasn't interested in the wonders of our galaxy. No. I was not averse to seeing the crystal rainbow sunsets of Cristobal II or the migration of misty leviathans in the upper layers of the Big Five gas giants. But the very idea of this cruise struck me as kind of frantic. Not contrived, though, not by any means, and not frivolous. Not at all. It was just that when I thought about the fact that there would be a lot of people on the liner, besides Esmeralda and me, I felt a little uneasy. I didn't really need them at that point. What the hell do I need all this crowd with its joys and sorrows? Though hardly anyone would be so hopelessly sorrowful in the most expensive and exotic cruise of the galaxy. When Esmeralda is next to me, I thought. Naturally, it didn't occur to me to hide these thoughts from Esmeralda. I had laid it all out for her as soon as she first suggested we go on a cruise. We had rented a room in one of the megacities of the ring world of the Merry Snake at that time, and my reaction had even made the transparent window membranes of the living house we inhabited twitch and blur. They were very sensitive to emotion, and I had resorted to rather harsh language with my refusal. "Easy, darling," Esmeralda said then, smiling with only the corners of her mouth, but as dazzlingly as only she could. Reaching out to the window, she gently stroked the membrane. The window immediately shuttered, relaxed, and regained transparency, flooding the room with a soft beige light. In the evening light, the dendrolymph that flowed in the thin vessels of the membrane glowed gold. We won't have to pay any attention to all these people. We can stay in our quarters while the liner is on the move, and we could take personalized tours at the stops. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking into my eyes. Imagine, just you, me, and all the beauty of the galaxy, and no one else around. It's hard to believe, but I didn't agree even then. Maybe it was the pride I'd built up over a lifetime, or stupidity. But I still said I would think it over, though somewhere in my mind, I realized I couldn't refuse. And what could I offer for another option? The most vivid experience in my biography was the meeting and relationship with Esmeralda. And against this background, I could not think of anything else. We first met on the Acheron, which, as you can imagine, is not the best place to start a romantic relationship. I was off for vacation after a long and arduous trip to a planet whose inhabitants had spent the last few decades devoting their efforts to mutual destruction. The Federation's External Affairs Department, I wish I could look into the eyes of the idiot who called the intelligence service that, had decided that even though the planet wasn't part of the Federation, it was not right for us to tolerate such an outrageous situation. As usual, it was ordinary operatives like me who had to deal with these good intentions. Well, maybe not so ordinary, but excellent operatives. But I still ended up on Acheron after several years of exhausting work. Of course, I had an advantage over probably 80% of the people who ended up there. Experience is almost always an advantage, no matter what we're talking about. And believe me, I've had plenty of it in my career. Usually, I could easily find others like me among the stream of returnees, and we kept each other company in the queue for the portals. It's all about the expression of our faces and especially our eyes. There is something in the eyes of someone who has been to Acheron more than once, something you don't see in first-timers or, even more so, in the originals. But this time, I found no one. That is, no one like me. But I found Esmeralda. After that, any search made no sense to me. She shone among the crowd like a sun among the dim candles, and when the sun's rays touched me, I was drawn to her with an irresistible force. From that moment on, we were never apart for a day. And sure enough, the following day after that mild argument in the live-in, I said that a cruise would be an excellent idea. I never asked Esmeralda about her life before Acheron. Of course, such inquiries are considered bad manners everywhere, but politeness, as they say, is socially approved but voluntary. Moreover, in my line of work, you don't indulge much about what others think about your manners. Normally, I didn't, but meeting Esmeralda changed that. All external affairs operatives are entitled to an automatic 6-month paid vacation after a field assignment that ends on Acheron, a sacredly honored external affairs tradition. No matter how much experience you gain, going through Acheron still leaves a stamp on your soul, and when you already barely have a spare space for new stamps down there, you need to take a little time off. My colleagues spent this vacation in different ways. Some spent their vacations in the best gambling houses and resorts in the galaxy. Others, on the contrary, secluded themselves in the wilderness, in a hut built on a planet with a population of 100 people. Everyone had his own way of restoring mental strength. I was an original. I studied. Of course, you can't become a bachelor in 6 months. Still, at any good university, you can become a free student for a certain amount of money and listen to a course or two of lectures on the peculiarities of the economic system of the 8 clone planets of the Sengoya system, or on the social structure of the wave-makers living in migrating dust and gas nebulae. I did not get into physics, ultramathematics, and other exact sciences. There was too little time to master at least the beginnings necessary to come close to understanding the basics. Biology and social sciences were just fine. But this time, things were going the other way. A few days after we departed from Acheron, I realized that I no longer needed to immerse myself in the atmosphere of venerable educational institutions, where the stately calm of ancient classrooms blended surprisingly well with the indomitable energy of young students. I was fueled by both, including even the slanted glances of those who recognized me as someone who had returned from Acheron. Anything would do to make me feel alive again. It was different with Esmeralda. Not only did she not need to be restored, but on the contrary, she radiated the very essence that Acheron usually had taken away, and sometimes irrevocably, from everybody, that very first day, when we had just exited the portal to one of the inner worlds. Esmeralda took both my hands and turned to me. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. "Is something wrong?" she asked, looking into my eyes, which I knew for a fact were no more expressive than cold glass. "Gabe, what's wrong? Why are you being so different? Aren't you glad you're back?" Glad to be back on Acheron. It just didn't make sense to me. If it had been anyone else, I would have thought it was a pitiful attempt at humor. But it was Esmeralda. What could I say to her? Nothing. I stood there silent and dumb, staring into her anxious yet radiant eyes, trying to find that mysterious place in my mind where thoughts were supposed to be born. I stood there until Esmeralda's gaze penetrated the very depths of my soul, which I had never believed in and still don't. I don't know how to describe it, but I suddenly felt that I no longer needed to escape to yet another repository of human wisdom to scoop up a teaspoonful of meaning of life. Usually, the originals try to avoid those who have returned from Acheron. We remind them of a central feature of the universe, one that no human being, star, galaxy, or lone photon hurtling through the intergalactic void can escape. We remind them of the inevitable. Sometimes, I try to imagine what those who lived before Acheron entered our existence thought, and how the world around them felt. Were they all like Esmeralda? Or did they still feel that icy breath of inevitability, but carelessly brushed it away because there weren't billions of walking reminders looming in front of them? The first month I spent with Esmeralda is hardly imprinted on my memory. My salary and bonus for a successfully completed mission, that planet was eventually reconciled and brought into the Federation of Acheron, were more than enough for a comfortable life for two. I don't know if Esmeralda had any savings of her own. We never discussed it, nor did I care. I wish I could say I wouldn't let her spend a dime, but that's not true. I'd let her do anything. We lived on one of the inner circle worlds, but not in one of the standard hotels for returnees. Esmeralda found us a lovely little apartment on the outskirts of a large city, one of the areas where the local originals lived. Our landlady, unfortunately I don't remember her name because in those days there was only one name for me, Esmeralda, was the sweetest woman. I don't know whether it was her spirit, natural cheerfulness, or just a habit. After all, she worked as a receptionist in a huge hotel complex for returnees. Still, I didn't feel the usual aloofness in her gaze and attempts to instantly erect a barrier, to shut herself off. This was true not only for Esmeralda. I still can't imagine anyone wanting to shut her out, but also for me. The landlady was noticeably older than Esmeralda, but even despite this difference between them, they had something to cheerfully chat about, some women's happy small talk, which I did not really understand. Not that I really wanted to. I just sat in a corner and listened to their conversation gently flowing over the surface of my consciousness like a clear, cool spring. And then the night would come, a magical, crazy, mysterious, healing night when Esmeralda and I were alone in the cozy little bedroom. When it was time to move on, we hadn't planned anything. We just realized it was time. We said goodbye to our hostess and took a gyro taxi to the nearest portal. We didn't promise to return. Both she and we knew that even if we did, it wouldn't really be us anymore, or not us at all. Going to Mary Snake was my idea. It seemed to me that after the peace and quiet, it would be good for us to dive into something bright and frenetic, buzzing with life and energy. Esmeralda confessed that she had never been to the ring world, but had always dreamed of looking at it from at least the corner of her eye. This was perhaps her biggest revelation about the past before Acheron. Naturally, I immediately booked tickets there. You couldn't get to Mary Snake through the portal system. The ring world was located in a spatial anomaly that didn't allow for a reliable instant travel network. Or maybe they just decided to add the need to get there by liner as an extra exotic feature. If so, they got what they wanted. I think it was at the moment of our arrival on the Mary Snake that Esmeralda first thought of cruising. A fateful thought that ultimately changed everything, but that came later. Jump ships usually came out of subspace within a few astronomical units of the ring world, and the entire Mary Snake was instantly visible to the crowded passengers. A huge shining jewel, a giant wedding ring worn by the local sun. The sight was impressive even to me, though it was far from the first time I had seen it. Esmeralda, on the other hand, was simply enchanted. I still suspected that she had spent all or most of her life, before Acheron, on some provincial, quiet planet where people lived carefree and peaceful lives, content with the simple pleasures of everyday life, and rarely venturing outside their familiar surroundings. But that was just a guess, and now it's too late. On the Merry Snake, I began to come around a bit. Not that the euphoria of the first month of my life with Esmeralda had dissipated. Instead, it was just that my rational thinking finally learned to break through the ocean of boundless happiness. Merry Snake is a very cosmopolitan place. You can meet anyone there, originals, newcomers, returnees, outsiders from the independent worlds, and even non-humanoids from the outlands. No one gets much attention there, and even those who weren't initially prepared for such a kaleidoscope quickly get used to ignoring even the most surprising company. I'd been there more than once, but I hadn't been too attracted to the ostentatious idleness of the place before, especially since I still unmistakably saw others like me in the crowd. Those who had passed through Acheron more than a dozen times, and each such encounter acted on me like a plunge into the icy waters of reality. The carefree atmosphere of the Merry Snake immediately began to seem to me only an iridescent shell of a soap bubble, below which, under a large layer of ringing emptiness, lies the lifeless gray concrete. It was only when I got to the ring world with Esmeralda that I could finally, at least partially, understand those who live on this iridescent shell. Now, I think maybe that's why I hesitated at first when Esmeralda said she wanted to go on a transgalactic cruise. For the first time in many cycles, I could finally feel attached to a place and taste the long-forgotten pleasure of existence, and something in me fiercely resisted the idea of leaving it. But when I tried to object again, after the time for reflection I had haggled over, I saw a gleam of some strange expression in her eyes for the first time, such as I had never seen on her face until then. And that expression, that fleeting dark spark, frightened me enough that I instantly gave up. A week later, we were already aboard a cruise ship. I won't describe all the places we visited in 3 months. You can explore them perfectly without my clumsy story. Just take an advertising booklet of any cruise company or watch one of the stereo movies that these companies show for free on their channels. You'll get as complete an idea of the wonders and beauties of the galaxy as you can without a personal visit, especially as they are now increasingly merging in my mind into a continuous, meaningless, colorful carousel. All but 2. Those will never be erased from my memory. 2 weeks later, our liner stopped in the Forgotten Temple system. Not the most famous attraction, I agree, but it was practically on the liner's route anyway, so why not take a peek? Honestly, I wasn't too keen on wasting time on this system. The thing is, I'd been here once before. Alas, for work. Which, as usual, ended with Acheron. Of course, all the temples, or rather, whole huge orbital cities, built when different religious organizations, had been thoroughly checked since then, and these checks were now regular. There were no portals in this system either, and external affairs agents like me were dropped into the system on government courier ships. But back then, many years ago, I couldn't even tell you exactly how many. Frequent communication with Acheron gradually erases the sense of time. Everything here was far from so rank and noble. Back then, a sect had settled here that considered Acheron the spawn of evil and was looking for a way to avoid communicating with it after what would inevitably happen to all of us. The way they sought was, of course, practical. While they experimented on each other, they managed to keep things quiet, but as time went on, they grew desperate. Their followers stopped coming back after Acheron, and then the remaining ones started kidnapping people and experimenting on them. Naturally, all this soon became known to the external affairs, and a group of operatives were sent to the Forgotten Temples. Me and my colleagues. Naturally, Esmeralda talked me into it this time as well. The only thing I was able to do was to book a tour to the Temple of All Salvation, a relatively small station in near solar orbit that had been empty for nearly 1,000 years and had not been fully restored. I found the combination safe enough. "What does safety have to do with it, honey?" Esmeralda asked me. "I thought the Federation was one of the safest places in the universe, certainly in the galaxy. That's not what I'm interested in." "What is it then?" I asked. I wasn't surprised at all. Esmeralda looked thoughtfully at the local sun, a G2 class star. Dimmed by reliable light filters, of course. The Temple of All Salvation had to be out there somewhere. But the little dot of the orbital station was completely lost against the sea of fire. "It's a very ancient temple, isn't it?" she said, suddenly serious. So much so that the needle of worry pricked me again. "Older than the Federation itself." She waited for my nod and continued. "I really want to feel how people lived back then, what it was like. We can't understand it now, but I want to try." I was almost afraid to meet her gaze, but when we did, it was Esmeralda. My beautiful and sunny Esmeralda. 99.5%. What's a 0.5%, I thought at the time. I guess it wasn't a well-considered thought. In fact, I liked the station myself. Naturally, the travel agency made sure that the temple looked decent. The dust had been cleaned up, and the metal surfaces had been cleaned a little. Not too much so that they didn't shine like new, but I knew where to look and what to notice. Ancient altars, the stern and ascetic faces of forgotten saints and gods, the fanciful writing that adorned the walls and images. None of us knew the language, but the letters smelled of austere solemnity. Skipping the guided tour, we just wandered a little on our own through the corridors and halls of the temple, soaking up the station's atmosphere. I kept looking at Esmeralda and saw that she was completely absorbed by the spectacle. I was pleased, and at the same time a little dismayed, that she was so engrossed in this sarcophagus of long-dead beliefs and ideas. Nevertheless, the 3 hours flew by almost unnoticed. We were sitting in the shuttle, sipping fine wine from the cloud gardens of Sadu 4 and discussing what we had seen, when Esmeralda suddenly stopped talking, turned away, and said quietly, "Gabe, don't you think we're thieves?" I must admit, I was confused. "Huh?" It wasn't the smartest answer, but it was the only one I could come up with. "Thieves," Esmeralda said patiently. "We stole everything from these people. Yes, their religion was amusing and even ridiculous. Who could believe in any gods once you'd start traveling in the galaxy? But they were honest. They knew exactly where they were. What about us? I think we lost that knowledge a long time ago." I mumbled something unintelligible about the philosophical significance of ancient religions and their essential place in Federation culture, but Esmeralda only shook her head. A strange smile played on her lips, piercing through me and staying in a place in my soul that I hadn't even realized was there until now. I didn't yet know that things would soon change, or didn't want to know. We arrived at Gehenna around the 40th day of the cruise, a huge planet with a surprisingly low gravity for its size, so close to the sun that its surface is perpetually alternating between searing heat and cosmic cold. The biggest wonder of this planet was a strange migrating biosphere chasing the narrow terminator zone, the only habitable area. You say it's impossible. There can't be a planet so large and so slowly rotating that such a system could exist. You're probably right, But we did land on Gehenna. As usual, the cruise company provided several sightseeing options. It was possible to join a general tour with experienced guides who talked about the unique biosphere of the planet, about the vagaries of evolution and whatnot. Of course, we chose another option. Tourists were not allowed to go to Gehenna alone, but it was possible to take a small shuttle for two. It was as automated as possible, so even a child could handle it. The shuttle had a spacious cabin and a great bar with a large selection of various drinks and stimulants. There was everything to enjoy. A picnic for two on one of the most unique planets in the galaxy. We had a wonderful 2 hours admiring the incredible beauty of the sunrise. It was still a long way from the Terminator line, but the sun of Gehenna was already making itself known, coloring the blue sky in the most piercing shades of scarlet and orange. The last giant creepers, spherical moving plants, had rolled past us about 20 minutes ago. Most plants and animals constantly moved to stay within the Terminator zone, but some remained. Plants that had already produced seeds and old animals that had already produced offspring. Amazing, Esmeralda said, looking around at the landscape of doomed life. It would all die, burn up in just a few hours, forever. Crumble into ashes from which there would be no return. Not through Acheron. No way. So scary and so mesmerizing. Actually, it's like that everywhere, I said. Remember, only the intelligent beings return to Acheron. Esmeralda nodded slightly. I know, she said, but here it's so obvious, so honest. Since that visit to the ancient dead temple, she'd returned to the subject more than once, which made me more uneasy. I was afraid to find out where she was going with this, but I was even more afraid to suggest that we cut the cruise short, especially since I had nothing to offer her in return. Don't frown so much, sweetheart, she said when she saw my face and kissed me lightly. That expression doesn't suit you at all, Gabriel. It's so professional. I don't want you to feel professional with me. You know we have a big date tonight, right? I must have looked really stupid, frantically trying to figure out what she meant. We'd only known each other for about 3 months. Esmeralda walked to the bar and poured a light sunseed tonic from Agartha 5 into 2 crystal glasses. We have a very important date today, she said, holding out 1 glass to me. Today is 97 days since we first met, and I am very grateful to you for every second of these days we have spent together. I'm so happy we met. We clinked glasses and drank. It was so Esmeralda-esque that I didn't suspect a thing. I can't forgive myself for being so stupid. It took 6 men and a triple dose of heavy-duty tranquilizer to calm me aboard a cruise ship. Later, when I had already stopped screaming incessantly and beating in the power grabs on the bed in the medical section, the head of security showed me pictures of the devastation, which I made, breaking through to the shuttle hangar. You've put up quite a fight, he said with poorly concealed admiration. He sounded like the fisherman admiring a strong fish that had resisted long enough before being pulled up. I said nothing. I didn't want to please him with stupid comments, especially since I didn't have any. No comments, no thoughts, no emotion, no life. Nothing. That dark day, I woke up on the liner. The stewards dragged me asleep out of the shuttle and carried me to the cabin. When I woke up in my cabin and did not find Esmeralda there, I thought at first that she had just gone for a walk to let me sleep in peace. I didn't even realize that I had fallen asleep on Gehenna, and that I had absolutely no memory of that moment. The most unlucky of all was the travel agent who came to tell me that Esmeralda had decided to stay on Gehenna. The head of security said the poor guy would have to spend at least a month in a regeneration capsule. Several fractures, concussion. I promised to apologize. Maybe. Of course, it was all for nothing on my part. She was very precise in her calculations. By the time the shuttle had returned in automatic mode to the liner, the Terminator line had already been half an hour beyond the spot where she'd been waiting for it. So there was no point in my trying to hijack the shuttle and return to Gehenna to get her. Not all of the liner's crew was made up of returnees. I could see it in their eyes. But all of them were clearly perplexed as to why I was getting so riled up. Someone, I think it was the chief passenger manager, obviously the most experienced in terms of dealing with difficult customers, even came to me to explain that completing another cycle on Gehenna is a fairly common practice, and that the tour company, while not welcoming this choice of clients, fully respects it. He would personally see to it that all the paperwork was done properly, so I had absolutely nothing to worry about. At that moment, he finally met my eyes. He choked up, muttered an unintelligible apology, and then corkscrewed out of the sick bay. I promised myself not to look for him when I was finally released. After all, it wasn't his fault. Or rather, it wasn't his fault any more than it was all of ours. It was later that I discovered Esmeralda had left me a note. Just one word. Thieves. I shot myself just half an hour after I tendered my resignation from external affairs. The first time is always the most painful, so they say. But with time, all pain is dulled. It's a characteristic of the dead, the small minority of the living, those who have not yet visited Acheron, we call them originals, are not so inclined to believe us. But it is true. Mankind reached the interstellar expanse before the age of Acheron, but only the dead managed to truly explore the galaxy. And even for us, it took centuries, too long to remember the price we had to pay. The vast black mirrored surface of Acheron stared at me indifferently, with the monstrous eye of a cruel deity whose name was eternity. I don't know how many days I spent here on the shore. After returning to the world, we diligently create the appearance of a familiar life. It is believed that this is done to maintain civilization, and not to bother the originals, although they know and understand everything perfectly well. But in reality, we are dead. We don't need food or sleep or anything else. It's all just habits, carefully cultivated after each return. That's what the hotel worlds of the inner circle made for, and we only do it for ourselves, to somehow fill the void we've become. Day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute, I sit on a small hill by the shores of Acheron and watch human figures rise and come ashore from the black, silent ocean, shaking off the splashes of nothingness. There are 3 places where the dead are forbidden to go. These places cannot be reached by a portal network or an interstellar ship because they were once inside us, but we have long since forgotten the way to them. These places were once called hope, love, and dreams. Acheron stole those places from us and replaced them with emptiness. Or we stole them from ourselves, making a deal with Acheron and then blaming it on him. Thieves. Silent, indifferent ranks walk past me toward the portals, looking at me with blank stares. I stare back at them, even though I know it's stupid. Of course, there's always the chance that Acheron will return a person with a delay. It happens. It's even happened to me before. I still haven't figured out who or what Esmeralda was, but with some deep dead man's sense, the little piece of soul we still have left, I know that there will be no repeat and that my vigorous pilgrimage here on the shores of the Acheron is utterly pointless. I know that even if I meet her here, it won't be her, and I won't meet her, because we broke a cardinal rule. We have visited 3 places that dead people are not allowed to visit, and the punishment is not being able to go back, ever.